If you'd asked me a year ago what the most awkward moment of my life was, I'd probably have said the time I accidentally liked my ex's Instagram photo from 2 years ago while stalking his profile at 2 a.m. But that changed the night I slept in the same bed as my best friend's older brother and woke up with his hand on my thigh. Let me back up. It started when my best friend Josh invited me to stay over at his family's lake house for the weekend. It was the usual setup: beer, video games, and pretending we were still 17 again, even though we were pushing mid-20s. I hadn't been to that place since high school, and the second I walked through the door, all the nostalgia hit me at once. Same creaky floorboards, same mismatched plates in the kitchen, same framed picture of Josh and his brother on the wall, shirtless, sunburned, grinning like idiots from some long-ago summer. Josh's older brother, Brandon, the guy who used to walk around in basketball shorts and no shirt, always sweaty from a run, always just there. I'd had the most inconvenient crush on him growing up. Muscular, charismatic, completely out of reach. And straight. That part was important. At least, that's what I thought. I hadn't seen Brandon in years. He'd moved to a different city after college, started some landscaping business, or something physical that involved a lot of tan and muscle. But that weekend, he was back too. Josh casually dropped it while we were unloading groceries. By the way, Brandon's staying here this weekend too. He'll be up late though, has a job nearby, and might crash in one of the guest rooms. I played it cool, nodded, shrugged, said something like, "Oh, cool, I haven't seen him in forever." Inside though, full body anxiety. The kind where your stomach flips and your face flushes, and you have no idea why, because you're a grown adult now, and this is just your best friend's brother. A guy. A guy who, okay, yes, once walked in on you changing during sophomore year and said nice boxers with a wink. The first night, everything felt normal. We grilled burgers, drank a couple of beers by the fire pit, caught up on dumb stories from college. Brandon didn't even show until after midnight, and by then I was half asleep in the living room. I barely registered him walking in, just a tall, broad-shouldered blur with a duffel bag slung over his back and that same cocky smile. "You still drool when you sleep?" he joked as he passed me on the way to the kitchen. "Only when I dream about you," I muttered before I could stop myself. He laughed. Deep and genuine. I think that was the first time I realized how dangerous it was going to be having him around all weekend. The next day, Josh and I spent most of the afternoon out on the lake. By nightfall, we were wiped. Josh bailed early, claimed a headache from too much sun and beer, and left me and Brandon on the deck watching the water go black as the sun disappeared. There was something weirdly intimate about it. The silence. The soft clink of our bottles. The way he sat close, like he didn't even notice how little space there was between us. "You heading to bed soon?" I finally asked, standing up and stretching. "Yeah, probably. Josh told me to take his room since he's crashing in the basement," Brandon said, then hesitated. "But I think he meant you were in there already." "Oh, I mean, it's a queen bed. I don't mind sharing if you don't." He looked at me, eyes unreadable for a second, then shrugged. "Cool, long as you don't steal the covers." That was how I ended up in bed with Brandon, the guy the first used to daydream about while pretending not to watch him mow the lawn shirtless. We didn't talk much once we got into the room, just stripped down to boxers, turned off the light, and slid under the covers like it was nothing. Like this wasn't completely uncharted territory for me. At first, I lay stiff as a board on the far edge of the mattress, careful not to make contact. But sometime during the night, I must have shifted. Or he did. Because when I woke up, the sun barely creeping in through the window, Brandon's leg was hooked over mine, and his hand was resting on my thigh, firm, warm, possessive. I didn't move, I barely breathed. Was he still asleep? Was he dreaming? Or was this, God, was this real? Then I felt it. His thumb. Just the slightest movement, stroking, back and forth, back and forth. I could feel my pulse in my throat, in my ears, everywhere. And that's when Brandon whispered, "You awake? You awake?" I didn't respond right away. My brain short-circuited, trying to decide if I should fake sleep, roll away, or whisper something back that didn't make me sound like I was about to pass out from how fast my heart was racing. I finally whispered, "Yeah." He didn't say anything for a few seconds, just breathed. I could feel it against my neck. Slow, steady, way too intimate for a guy who was supposedly straight. His hand was still there on my thigh, not moving anymore, but not pulling away either. "Sorry," he muttered, voice low and raspy. "Wasn't trying to freak you out." "You didn't." He went quiet again. I could sense the hesitation in the way his body tensed slightly behind me. I was too aware of everything. How close he was, how warm he felt, how easy it would be to just lean back and let whatever this was happen. "Didn't think you'd be cool with me touching you like that," he added after a pause. I swallowed hard. "What made you think I wasn't?" He let out a slow exhale. "I don't know. Josh always talked about you like you were off limits, like you were his guy, his friend, and I should leave you alone." The mention of Josh snapped me back into reality a little. Sharing a bed with his brother was one thing, but whatever this was edging toward, that was a whole different level of complication. "He doesn't own me," I said quietly. Brandon let out a soft chuckle. "Yeah, I figured that much." There was a shift behind me, the mattress creaking slightly. His hand moved off my thigh, reluctantly, like he didn't really want to let go, but instead of pulling away, he placed it on my hip. "I've been thinking about doing that since last night," he said, so soft I almost didn't hear it. That made me turn. Just slightly, just enough to look over my shoulder and catch his eyes in the dim morning light. "You've been thinking about putting your hand on my thigh?" he smirked. Among other things, I stared at him, trying to piece together what the hell was going on here. This was Brandon, the golden boy, Josh's older brother, the guy the first used to dream about while knowing I had zero chance. The guy who, until now, had never given me a single real sign he might not be as straight as I thought. "What changed?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His face was close now, closer than it had any right to be at 6-something in the morning in a shared bed. "I guess I stopped pretending I didn't notice you," I blinked. "You noticed me?" "Back then?" "All the time. But you were younger, and I was being a dumbass, trying to play the straight role, 'cause it was easier. I didn't think you'd ever actually want me." My mouth went dry. "And now?" He shrugged, the motion subtle but deliberate. "Now I'm older. You're not a kid anymore. And you're lying in my bed looking like that." His hand slid just slightly along my hip, sending goosebumps up my side. I wanted to be clever. Say something witty. But I couldn't think. All I could do was turn a little more, until I was facing him properly. Brandon looked at me, eyes serious now, a flicker of nervousness behind that confident smirk he always wore. Like he was trying to read me, figure out if he'd crossed a line or if I was about to lean in. And I almost did. Almost. But just then, we both heard it. Footsteps downstairs. A door creaking. Josh. Shit. We both froze. Brandon's hand slipped away and I rolled onto my back, putting a few safe inches between us just before the bedroom door creaked open slightly. "You guys awake?" Josh called. Brandon sat up, rubbing his face. "Yeah, man, just waking up." I tried to sound casual. "Morning." Josh yawned from the hallway. "Lake's calm. Gonna make coffee. Y'all want some?" "Definitely," Brandon said, already sliding out of bed like nothing happened. "Be down in a sec," I added, voice even. Josh's footsteps faded. Brandon stood there for a moment, his back to me. Then he looked over his shoulder and said, "This isn't over." He smiled, one of those slow, confident grins, and walked out. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell just happened, and how I was supposed to get through the rest of this weekend without doing something that would change everything. And deep down, I kind of hoped it would. The morning after was a study in pretending nothing happened. Pretending I wasn't reeling from the way Brandon's hand had felt on my thigh. Pretending I wasn't hyper-aware of every glance, every brush of his shoulder, every smirk that now seemed charged with a meaning I couldn't quite name. We all sat around the kitchen table like we used to in high school, eating cereal straight from the box and talking about nothing in particular. Josh looked rough, still half asleep, hair a mess, and completely oblivious. Brandon, on the other hand, looked smug, relaxed, like he knew a secret no one else in the room did. Because he did. He caught my eye while Josh was elbow deep in a box of frosted flakes, and there was something in his gaze that made my stomach twist. Not nerves, anticipation. After breakfast, Josh announced he was heading into town to grab more beer and some ice. "You guys good here for a bit?" Brandon looked at me and shrugged. "Yeah, we'll hold down the fort." Josh grabbed his keys, called out a quick, "Don't break anything," and left. The second the front door shut, the silence felt different. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me from across the kitchen. "So?" he said finally. "So?" I echoed, trying not to look at how good he looked in that sleeveless shirt or how his biceps flexed every time he shifted. "You good?" "Yeah," I hesitated. "Are you?" Brandon gave a crooked smile. "Depends. Are you pretending last night didn't happen?" I let out a breath, crossing my arms too, mostly to stop my hands from fidgeting. "No, but I don't know what it was." "It was me," he said simply, not pretending for once. That hit harder than I expected. He took a step toward me. "Look, I'm not trying to mess with you. I'm not trying to confuse you. I just—" He paused, glancing toward the window. "It's been a long time since I let myself want something. Or someone." The air between us tightened. "And you're someone?" he smirked. "You always did have a smart mouth." "Yeah, well, you always walked around shirtless and ruined my adolescence." He laughed at that, low and genuine. Then his voice softened. "I didn't mean to." I looked at him then, really looked at him. He wasn't just the hot older brother anymore. He wasn't some high school fantasy. He was a grown man standing in front of me, being honest in a way that made my chest ache a little. "So what do you want?" I asked, quieter this time. His answer came fast. "I want to kiss you." I blinked. That's bold. I figured I'd try being direct for once. The silence stretched. I didn't move, didn't speak, until I did. "Then, do it." He didn't need to be told twice. He crossed the space between us like it meant nothing, like he hadn't been holding back for years, and his hands went to my waist, firm and warm. I felt his breath on my cheek before his lips touched mine, soft at first, almost cautious. "Testing. Asking," I answered. The kiss deepened slowly. There was no rush, no desperation, just the kind of quiet intensity that makes the room fall away. His hand slid up my back, pulling me a little closer, and I let him. I didn't want to stop, not for anything, except the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. We jumped apart like teenagers caught making out by a parent. Brandon ran a hand through his hair, suddenly breathless. "Shit! Josh!" "Yeah," I said, equally breathless. "Timing is not our thing." He looked at me then, really looked, and grinned. "We'll get better." The front door opened and Josh's voice rang out. "You guys seriously didn't do anything while I was gone?" "I was gone like 45 minutes. Brandon winked at me before stepping into the hallway. "Nah, man, we were just talking." He turned to me once more before disappearing from view. But the look he gave me said everything. This wasn't just a one-time thing. Something had shifted between us. Quietly. Irrevocably. And I had a feeling the next time we were alone, pretending wouldn't be an option anymore. The rest of the day felt like a game of chicken. Every time Brandon and I were in the same room, something unspoken passed between us. A glance. A brush of fingers when we reached for the same beer. A smirk that said, "Yeah, I remember exactly how your lips felt this morning." And every time Josh entered, it was like someone hit pause on whatever weird, electric thing was building between us. By evening, the three of us were back on the deck, drinking and watching the sun drop behind the trees. Josh was halfway through some story about a coworker who got caught sleeping in the conference room when Brandon stretched his arms behind his head and stood. "Gonna shower," he said casually, grabbing a towel off the railing. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. "Don't take all the hot water," Josh called after him. I sat still for about 5 minutes, pretending to be invested in Josh's story. Nodded in the right places. Sipped my drink. But my thoughts weren't on conference room drama. They were with the guy upstairs. In the shower. Without clothes. Behind a thin bathroom door. I'm gonna head in too, I said finally, standing up and stretching like it was no big deal. Need to check some emails. Josh waved me off. Nerd? I smiled, but I wasn't heading for my laptop. I passed Brandon's room, heart pounding in my throat. I should have kept walking. Should have respected boundaries. Should have at least knocked. But the door was slightly ajar, and I heard the water still running. Steam curled out of the bathroom, thick and warm. I paused at the threshold. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Permission? A sign? Then I heard it. Doors open. Brandon's voice called through the steam. I stepped inside before I could talk myself out of it. The bathroom mirror was fogged, and through the glass shower door, I could just make out his silhouette. Broad shoulders, narrow waist, head tilted back under the spray. Hey, I said, voice slightly hoarse. Hey, he echoed, cracking the door open just a few inches. His face was flushed, steam curling around his hairline. You can just stand there, or? I raised a brow. You inviting me in? He didn't answer with words, just opened the door the rest of the way and stepped aside. My pulse jumped so hard I thought I might pass out. Still, I undressed slowly, methodically, giving myself time to back out if I wanted to. I didn't want to. By the time I stepped in, the water was hotter than I expected, almost scalding. But I didn't care. Brandon was in front of me. Close enough to touch, so I did. My hand found his chest, slick with water, and I felt the rise and fall of his breath beneath my fingers. He looked down at me like he was trying to memorize the moment. Then he leaned in and kissed me again, harder this time, with a hunger that hadn't been there this morning. It wasn't rushed, but it wasn't gentle either. It was need. His hands found my hips, then slid around to my back, pressing me against him. I could feel everything, his breath, his heartbeat, the tension in his body, and all of it was directed at me. Is this real? I asked against his mouth, because part of me still didn't believe it. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. Yeah, he said, it's real. Then his hands slid lower, and I stopped thinking altogether. We didn't go all the way, not that night, but we didn't need to. There was something about the way he touched me, held me, kissed me like I was something he'd been waiting for. It felt personal, intimate, messy in a way that meant it mattered. When we finally stepped out, towels around our waists, steam still thick in the air, Brandon looked at me and said, "We should probably figure out how to tell Josh." I stared at him. Tell him what? That this isn't just a lake house fling, he said, matter of fact. Unless that's all it is for you. My heart did that annoying flutter thing. No, I said, meeting his eyes. It's not. He smiled like he already knew the answer, and for the first time since I'd gotten there, I wasn't nervous anymore. I was ready to see where this went, even if it meant telling Josh. The next morning, things felt different. Not in a bad way. Just more. More charged. More real. More like the silence between us had weight now. Not from tension, but from everything we hadn't said out loud yet. Josh was still snoring in the basement when I crept out of Brandon's room. Clothes rumpled, hair a mess, lips still tingling from the last kiss he gave me before I left his bed. We'd stayed up late, talking, touching, not crossing the line, but towing it, repeatedly. Every brush of his fingers against my skin felt like a quiet confession. He didn't need to say much. I knew it wasn't just physical, not from the way he looked at me in the dark, eyes soft like he was figuring out how not to mess this up. But we hadn't figured out the Josh part yet. And that part still made my stomach knot. Josh was my best friend. Brandon was his older brother. There was no neat, convenient way to unravel that. When Josh finally stumbled upstairs late morning, Brandon and I had already agreed to play it cool. No lingering looks, no inside jokes, no accidental touches. Just business as usual. So we sat around the kitchen like nothing had happened. Again. Except this time, I couldn't stop sneaking glances at Brandon, and every time I did, he was already looking at me. It was stupid. And dangerous. And kind of amazing. You guys down for a hike? Josh asked, shoveling eggs into his mouth like a man who hadn't eaten in days. There's that overlook spot Dad used to take us to. Brandon, remember? Brandon blinked like he'd actually forgotten for a second that Josh was in the room. Yeah, sure. I'm in, I said before I could overthink it. We packed water bottles, snacks, and hit the trail. The weather was perfect, sunny but not scorching, and the trail wound through thick trees and old stone steps worn down by decades of boots and sneakers. I walked ahead with Josh most of the way, talking nonsense. Brandon followed a few feet behind, quiet but present. And every now and then, when Josh looked away, I'd glance over my shoulder just to catch Brandon's expression. He looked calm, but focused, like he was balancing something carefully in his head. By the time we reached the overlook, Josh plopped down on a rock and dug into the trail mix. Damn, forgot how good this view was, he said. I nodded absently, trying to enjoy the moment, but I could feel Brandon standing beside me, close enough that the back of his hand brushed mine. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't by accident. Josh was facing the other way. We were behind him, and that single, light touch was the most reckless thing either of us had done all day. I let my fingers curl back slightly, brushing his knuckles. His breath hitched. Barely, but I noticed. Then he murmured under his breath, so quiet I almost missed it. I want to tell him. I stiffened. Now? I whispered. He shook his head. Not here, not on this rock. But soon. I swallowed hard and nodded. It wasn't like I hadn't thought about it. I just hadn't expected Brandon to be the one ready first. Back at the house, Josh passed out on the couch after the hike, sun-drunk and snoring like it was a professional sport. Brandon and I slipped upstairs, not to do anything, but just to talk. I sat on the edge of the bed. He leaned against the door, arms crossed. I keep thinking, he said, about how many years I wasted not figuring this out. I looked at him. Figuring what out? He walked over slowly, stopping in front of me. That I like you. The words hit me with a weird softness. Not dramatic, not overly romantic, just honest. Like they'd been sitting inside him for a long time, waiting for air. I reached up, let my fingers graze his forearm. I'm glad you did, I said. Then came the footsteps on the stairs. Brandon and I locked eyes. No time to move apart. No time to make it look casual. Josh appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He stared at us for maybe 2 seconds too long, then said, okay, what the hell is going on? Josh's voice wasn't loud. He didn't sound angry, just confused. But that was somehow worse. Brandon straightened, instinctively stepping half a foot back. I stood slowly, heart thudding in my chest. Josh! Brandon started, but Josh held up a hand. No. Don't do that thing where you explain like I'm already pissed. Just be honest. The room was so quiet I could hear the fan spinning above us. I looked at Brandon, giving him a choice. Say something or I will. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then looked at his brother and said, We've been talking. Josh blinked. Talking? Brandon glanced at me. And more than talking. Josh turned his gaze on me. You? Yeah, I said, trying to keep my voice even. It's not a joke. And it's not just a thing. Josh stared at us for a long moment. Then he walked into the room and sat on the chair in the corner like he needed to take weight off his legs. I feel like I walked into an alternate timeline, he muttered. You and Brandon? Not planned, I said. Brandon added. Not casual either. Josh ran a hand down his face. How long? A few days, Brandon said. Josh blinked again like he was doing math. A few days? Brandon sat beside me on the bed, his knee just brushing mine. Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot longer. I just didn't say anything until now. Josh let out a breath that was somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. You know, when we were kids, I always thought you had a thing for Brandon. My head snapped up. What? He shrugged. You'd go quiet every time he walked in the room. Blush when he took his shirt off. I wasn't blind, Brandon laughed once. And you never said anything? I figured if it was true, it was harmless. You were a teenager with a crush. It didn't seem like something I needed to make weird. I cleared my throat. It's definitely weird now, huh? Josh looked at me, and for a second I couldn't read him. But then he smirked, just slightly, and said, "Yeah, it's weird, but not bad." I blinked. "Wait, really?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Look, I don't love that you guys snuck around, but I'm not going to lose my mind over it. You're both adults. And as long as nobody's lying or messing each other up, I can deal." Brandon exhaled beside me, and I felt his hand graze mine again. Subtle, but steady. "We're not just having a fling," he said. "I mean, I don't know where it's going, but it's not something casual." Josh nodded. "Good. Because if you hurt him, I'm legally obligated to punch you." "Older brother rules." Brandon grinned. "Fair enough." The tension slowly bled out of the room. Not completely, but enough. Josh stood. "All right, I'm going to go back to pretending you're both just roommates, at least for a day or two." As he walked out, he turned back once. "But for real, keep it out of the shared spaces, yeah?" "I don't need trauma," Brandon laughed. "No promises." Josh flipped him off and disappeared down the stairs. And just like that, the weight lifted. I looked over at Brandon. That went way better than I expected. "Same," he said, then leaned in to kiss me. Quick, soft, just enough to make me smile. "Now we don't have to hide." I let out a breath and leaned into his side. "I didn't think this weekend would change anything." He tilted his head, brushing his lips against my temple. "Yeah, well, I didn't think I'd fall for my little brother's best friend." The days after we told Josh were unexpectedly easy. There was no weird energy, no dramatic fallout. Josh mostly acted like nothing happened, still made dumb jokes, still stole my fries at lunch, still elbowed Brandon in the ribs whenever he made a sarcastic comment. And Brandon? He was different in subtle ways. Softer, maybe. Or just more certain. He'd touch the small of my back when we passed in the hallway. Toss me a look from across the room that said, "I see you." Nothing wild. Nothing Josh would have to walk out of the room for. Just real. We didn't have a talk about what we were yet. And honestly, we didn't need to. Not right away. I already knew. The lake house always made time feel slow, but that week, it moved too fast. Every night, Brandon and I ended up in the same bed, under the same thin sheet, our legs tangled, our voices low. He told me things I didn't expect, like how he used to think about what it would be like if I made a move back in the day, how he'd watch me and wonder if the looks I gave him were on purpose. "I thought it was just in my head," he said one night, fingers tracing lazy patterns along my side. "Like, no way could you actually be into me." I laughed into his chest. "You're joking, right? I used to fake being tired just so I could stay behind when you were around. I was obsessed." He smirked. "Glad we're finally on the same page." We kissed more, touched more, but still hadn't slept together. Not all the way. And it wasn't from lack of trying. Every time things started heating up, something would interrupt. Josh knocking on the door. A late-night storm knocking out the power. My phone buzzing with work calls I couldn't ignore. It almost became a running joke, like the universe was playing goalie. "You realize if we were teenagers this would have happened on day one?" Brandon muttered one morning as we lay tangled under the sheet. Skin warm from making out for a solid hour. "Speak for yourself," I grinned. I would have fainted, but I wanted it, and I could feel he did too. So when Josh told us he was driving into the next town to see a friend overnight, "Don't wait up," he said, winking at Brandon. I knew this was it. Brandon and I didn't say much that evening. We didn't need to. There was a slow, humming anticipation between us all night. We cleaned up dinner together. Sat on the couch watching a movie neither of us paid attention to. And when I stood up, stretched, and said, "You coming to bed?" His eyes said everything. He followed. No games. No teasing. Just heat. The moment the bedroom door closed, his hands were on me. My shirt hit the floor. His mouth was at my neck, slow and focused like he'd been dreaming about this. We didn't rush. We took our time. Like every touch was a conversation we'd waited years to have. And when it finally happened, when we finally crossed that line, it felt less like giving in and more like coming home. There was no awkwardness, no uncertainty. Just two people who knew each other well enough to move in sync without even trying. After, We lay there, tangled up in silence, our bodies warm and messy under the covers. I didn't even need words. I could feel it in the way he held me. But he spoke anyway. "This is the part where I usually panic," he said quietly. I looked at him, and now? He kissed my forehead. "I'm just wondering how fast I can get you to move to my city." That night was different. Not just because of what we did, though yeah, that was incredible, but because of what followed. No one rushed to get dressed. No one rolled away to stare at the ceiling and overthink. We stayed close, limbs tangled, hearts calm. For once, I wasn't spinning in my head about what any of it meant. I already knew. I'd fallen for Brandon. Quietly, slowly, and then, all at once, the second I woke up to his hand on my thigh that morning. The next day, we made breakfast like a couple. Brandon wore nothing but flannel pants and made eggs with way too much hot sauce. I stole bites from his plate. He didn't stop me. Josh came back around noon. He walked into the kitchen, saw us standing too close by the sink, gave us one long look, and just said, "You're disgusting." Brandon grinned. "Jealous?" Josh made a gagging noise and headed for the fridge. But later, when Brandon went out to load his truck, Josh nudged me on the shoulder. "He's good for you," he said, almost too casually. "You seem lighter?" I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. He knew. By the end of the weekend, Brandon and I were already talking logistics. Nothing big or dramatic. Just small things. Casual threads that hinted at something longer. "You ever think about moving?" he asked as we sat on the deck our last night, watching the lake shimmer under the moonlight. "Not seriously," I said. "But I could." "Just so you know," he added, "my city's got a great art scene, way better food, and my apartment has a real espresso machine." I raised an eyebrow. "So you're leading with coffee?" He leaned in. "I'm leading with incentives," I laughed. But he was serious, and 2 months later, I was packing boxes. Josh helped me move. He complained the whole drive about how weird it was to be helping his best friend move in with his brother. But at the end of the day, he carried the heaviest boxes and stayed to build a bookshelf we didn't really need. Brandon kept his arm around me the whole time. By fall, we had a rhythm: weeknight takeout, Sunday morning farmers markets, quiet nights that ended in even quieter kisses. We weren't perfect. We had to learn each other's quirks. Brandon snored when he was stressed. I left dishes in the sink too long, but none of it felt hard. Because when someone's your person, it doesn't have to. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me in the mornings, before either of us got out of bed. Like he still couldn't believe any of this was real. And every time, he'd say the same thing: "Best mistake I ever made was crashing in that bed with you."